Hey there, everyone. Welcome to Broadband Deployment News. So the clock is ticking on states' 5-year action plans for their BEAD program and getting funds. And that's despite there being a lot of uncertainty about the FCC map. I'll be right back and we'll talk about that. Thanks for joining me. Rick Husey here with Broadband Deployment News. So turns out that now all of the states that have requested funds from BEAD, and that was all of the states, and all the territories have requested those funds. All the states now have been approved for those funds and supposedly have received those planning funds. So each state knows that they're going to get $100 million out of BEAD, and then they were able to request up to 5% of that, or $5 million for BEAD planning funds. And they had to request that, and then the NTIA has come out, and they have now said that every state has been awarded those funds. So you're looking at a map here that's on the NTIA site, and you can see there's two colors here. There's kind of a darker orange and a lighter kind of orange yellowish color. So all of the states and Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. have been approved and received their funds supposedly. And then you've got the 4 territories here that they're in lighter yellow, meaning that they have put their application in, but they've not yet been granted the planning funds. And they split $5 million. So the 4 territories will split the $5 million, so they'll each get $1.25 million of planning funds. And those planning funds are really needed to get the ball rolling so that these states can get everything done that they need to get done so that they can go ahead and get ready for all of the money that they're going to be getting, and make sure that they can confirm who needs broadband, what areas need to be looked at, those kinds of things. So I'm going to look at this is let me make this bigger. No, it's big enough. Let me make what I'm looking at bigger. There we go. Okay, so this is a FAQ on the BEAD NOFO. It's not on the BEAD NOFO, but basically it's a FAQ kind of document that's available. I'll go ahead and link to this as well as to that NTIA site that's got the map there. But so this is you see here, the question on the FAQ is, what are the core milestones for the BEAD program, and what does an eligible entity need to submit by when? So the letter of intent for everybody has already gone in. You see there the date of July 18th. So all the states did that, as we saw in all the territories. And then it says DC and Puerto Rico may request up to $5 million, or state. So yeah, $5 million. Then you see the territories, $1.25 million. And they needed to get that in by August 15th. So obviously everybody did that. So the next step was, on or after the date on which the broadband data maps are made public, the Assistant Secretary will notify each eligible entity of the estimated amount of funding that NTIA will make available to the eligible entity. That would be the state or territory, whatever, under the program. So that's kind of the next thing that has to happen. But you see down here that each state, once they are awarded their planning funds, they have 270 days after the receipt of that to get their 5-year action plan in. So the first state to get money was Louisiana. That was on August 31st. So Louisiana got their money on August 31st, and then Ohio got their money on October 13th. And then there were a bunch of states around November 21st, I think it was. So November, December. And then the last state was Massachusetts. That was on the 23rd of December. So that was the last state to get their funds. So all these states, once they get their money, they have 270 days to go ahead and get their 5-year action plan in. So that basically is a 9-month gestation period of their 5-year plan as they put that together. So the clock is ticking on this, and if you look at that 9 months, then basically what you're looking at is like mid-July or so from the very first state, Louisiana, that requested if I remember that correctly, that requested their money back in August 31st. So you've got mid-July or so that's going to be the point where they have to have their 5-year plan in before then. Now, the NTIA has said, based on when they expect the next iteration of the FCC Map to come out, they've said that they expect to be able to announcing how much money each state is going to get by June 15th, right? So as I did a broadcast, I think it was yesterday, I get to do so many, I forget. So I think yesterday I was talking about the broadband kind of the broadband timing of the maps, or the timeline of the maps. And so I'm thinking that's probably going to be mid-May or so that the maps are going to come out based on challenge data. The FCC wants challenge data in to, they're recommending that people get it in by January 13th in order to get that challenge data incorporated in the next version of maps, the production map that's going to be out. And when you look at the timing of that, you have to look at the time that it's going to take every ISP to upload their availability data. And then you've got the map has to be developed from that. So I'm thinking probably mid-May, the map will come out, early to mid-May. And then June 15th, they say by that point, the NTIA will let each state know how much they get. So maybe a month later, and Ohio's going to have their 5-year action plan in. And obviously, every state can go ahead and get as ready as possible right now. So I think they have a really good handle on most places where they don't have broadband. The question is really the fine details. They may have a better idea than the FCC map, because a lot of them are challenging that, which I'll talk about here in a minute. So they're going to need to know how much money they're going to get, but they also need to know, as they work with sub-grantees who are going to be proposing building broadband in areas that don't have broadband, they need to know where there's no broadband. And then they need to be talking to these sub-grantees, these internet service providers or companies or organizations that will become internet service providers, like a municipality or an EMC. They need to be interacting with them and getting all of that in place. So I think probably what's happening in the state broadband offices now is they're trying to get everything as much as possible in place to the point where they have everything ready to go, except they know that there's going to be some slight change in the amount of money that they're expecting based on the final broadband map. So they've got to be taking all of that into account. They've got to be working on their 5-year plan now, so that as soon as that deadline, or whenever it is that the NTIA comes out and says, okay, here's how much money you get, that they're ready to proceed. They can just make the final tweaks to their 5-year plan, get that into the NTIA so that they can get this money out as quickly as possible. So, so the clock's ticking on that, but they need to be working on that now. So one of the questions, one of the issues is that a lot of the states are not happy with the maps. They're not happy with the challenge process. So they're looking at this is going to be very difficult for them. So again, they need to be working on some of this in advance. But you see here, states contend with short timeline to correct broadband map. States are racing against a deadline to challenge the map federal officials will use to divvy up the nation's largest ever investment in high-speed internet. States have until January 13th to challenge broadband speed map. The Federal Communications Commission released in November that for the first time illustrates the haves and have-nots of internet access down to specific street addresses. Critics long suspected the number of people with internet connections was overstated by the government, in part because agencies creating the maps deferred to telecom companies to say where service is provided. And that's not really true. I mean, yes and no. The problem was that it was, as it mentioned, it wasn't down to the street level. So it was based on the FCC's own forms, where they were asking every internet service provider, do you provide service in this census block? They weren't asking on a per address basis. They were just saying, here's a census block. Do you provide service, and at what speed? So that's what the internet service, that's all they could upload was, yes, we serve this census block. So it wasn't that they were necessarily misreporting, although that's certainly possible. And I think there was some anecdotal evidence that maybe they were saying they were giving speeds in an area that they weren't. But really, the bigger issue was that they could be providing a certain speed in a census block, and they could cherry pick the higher speed. So if a census block was a certain size and they were offering, let's say, gig service hasn't been around that long, but let's say they were offering gig service at one address or just a few addresses in that census block, and other addresses in that census block were DSL and they were getting very slow speeds. They could say in that census block they were offering gig speed, and that was the truth based on what they were doing. So they could certainly cherry pick, and probably would, I would think, cherry pick the higher speed that they were offering that census block. Or in a lot of cases, they were offering service. It was just the way that census block fell. It just so happened to be that they offered just service to just a few addresses in that census block, and maybe not the majority of them. But again, they had to report that, and they did offer service in that census block. So that was a real problem. So this map here goes down to the address level, And the biggest challenge on this map has been trying to figure out, number one, what every broadband serviceable location is in the United States, and then having the service providers be able to upload their data and match all of that stuff up on the broadband fabric so that we determine not just where each broadband serviceable location is, but what the service providers are that serve that address or that location, and then what speeds they offer. So you see here, extending service to remote areas with few customers can be expensive for internet providers, but using the surge of new federal funds to fill the gaps depends heavily on knowing where they are. So we need to know where they are. And it is expensive. That's the reason that we have the digital divide and we have these kind of islands out there that don't have broadband, is because it's much more expensive to serve an area that's a large area with very few customers, where you've got to run lots of copper or fiber or whatever to get to a customer, and you don't get much return on that. So that's why these places have been left behind. You don't have generally the big service providers that are in those areas. You've got a lot of independent service providers, and in some cases even they don't go in there. The independent providers and the big providers will handle the cities and the towns, but then you've got these vast areas between the towns of farmland and woods and stuff, and you've got houses here and there, and those have been the most challenging to get connected, and those are the most challenging to figure out where they are and are they supposed to get broadband, and that's where we have the issue with the broadband map. West Virginia officials already submitted challenges for 138,000 unserved homes, businesses, and other locations in the state that they say are missing, and they're preparing at least 40,000 more. According to the first draft of this year's FCC map, 2% of residential addresses in the U.S. have no broadband access at all, and 11% are considered underserved. But those figures are likely to rise after the state challenges. So no broadband access at all would mean that they could have internet, but it's less than 25 by 3. And an underserved means that it's over 25 by 3, but less than 100 by 20. So there's questions as to how accurate that information is. And I'm not sure how they filtered the map. You have to filter the map based on those kinds of figures to see those percentages. Now, there are a couple of different kind of challenges here that we're talking about. So what they're talking about here, let's say in West Virginia, 138,000 unserved homes and preparing 40,000 more. Well, that could very well be, it sounds terrible, but that very well could be fixed already, because what we're talking about there is the broadband fabric itself. In other words, are these 138,000 plus these 40,000 more locations on the fabric, are they broadband serviceable locations? That's got nothing to do with whether there's an internet service provider there providing service. Is that a location that should have service? And that fabric came out in the summer, and as of September 15th, broadband service providers, municipalities, tribal entities, other kind of entities that had access to the fabric could challenge that. So at that point, West Virginia and others could have been challenging that data, and certainly they are at this point. But it's very possible that West Virginia is looking at the map, but that fabric data has already been challenged by, let's say, a service provider there. So maybe there are several service providers that handle those 138,000 underserved homes that said, wait a minute, we provide service here. And they would have already updated that. But that was not in the fabric that West Virginia had access to, because those fabric challenges took place later. Let's say, the first map that we have access to, the broadband map, FCC Broadband Map, this first, what they're calling pre-production draft map, it only contains the information from the first fabric before any challenges were done. So it's very possible that these locations that everybody's really concerned about, lots of locations that are not on the map, that's already been challenged by the internet service providers themselves, or in some cases by local communities. And here we've got a state looking at it. But again, the state is looking at the data as it was prior to any challenges by, let's say, internet service providers. So that's one type of challenge. Now, the other type of challenge would be, is there really the internet service there? If you look at the map, it'll say who the internet service providers are, what speeds they offer, what type of technology. Is it fiber? Is it copper, DSL? Is it cable? Is it fixed wireless? So it could be that there are some misstatements there, that a service provider says, hey, we offer gig fiber here at this location, but maybe they don't. Maybe it's DSL, and maybe they don't have their numbers all right. So there's those kinds of challenges that you'll be seeing that I think some communities will be making, but that's going to be more likely on an individual address by address basis. And consumers can be making those challenges, but they need to know that they can do that. So they need to know that they can go up on the broadband map and check their address. And some communities and local stakeholders will be making those kinds of challenges as well. But those are still about availability. So that's about, is the type of service that the map says is here really there? Is it really fiber? Is it really gig service that's available? In other words, can I pick up the phone if I live in an address and call and get the 1 gig symmetrical plan? Or when I call, they're going to say, oh, that's not available at your home. That's that kind of challenge. It's still availability. And then finally, there are challenges that consumers can make, kind of crowdsourced challenge data that says, hey, this says that I can get DSL service 25 by 3, and I can call and I can order that. In fact, I have that, but when I do a speed test, I'm not anywhere near that. I'm getting 10 and maybe, a meg up and maybe 10 meg down. So that would be more of a service quality kind of challenge, and that can be challenged as well. But the internet service providers don't actually need to respond to those challenges. If the FCC sees that there's a pattern of inaccuracy there, then they will take care of that. And they're going to, as I mentioned yesterday, they're going to take care of that. And I think most quickly in those situations where it's on the cusp of, is this area served or unserved? So is this, when somebody's saying, a service provider says, hey, you can get 25 by 3 here, is that really true? Because that's really important, because if you can't, then that area is unserved, and that should be qualifying for federal funds from BEAD. But if it's a gig service and the customer is trying it out, they're doing speed tests, and they're more like 800 megabits per second, that's less important. It's, you still want the service provider to be truthful, but that's an area that is still served. There's no doubt that it's served at 800 megabits per second. So that's what's going on there. So those are different kinds of challenges. So we're seeing, again, we're seeing that, states are looking into this, and you see here this article, Hill asks FCC to allow for more broadband map challenges, citing errors, bipartisan Senate Commerce leadership calls for deadline extensions. Now, again, when they're citing errors that may already be fixed. So when you're looking at the broadband map today, and this is a picture of it right here, when you're looking at the broadband map today, you are not looking at the latest data that we have in the fabric. So the fabric, the next fabric is going to be released on January 3rd. And that fabric will have a lot of these errors that they're talking about corrected, again, because a lot of internet service providers and even communities have gone in and fixed that. They said, wait a minute, you've got these thousands of locations that are missing, and they've gone in and challenged that, and that will be fixed. So you need to keep that in mind as to when the NTIA is going to make this decision, do we extend this? They're going to be looking at, well, wait a minute, a lot of these challenges have already been addressed. So I think that's going to be the case on a lot of these really major ones that they're putting forward. The bipartisan leadership of the Senate committee wants stakeholders to have more time to challenge the accuracy of the FCC's new broadband availability map, given what they said were significant flaws already discovered in the draft map. And again, the draft map data, fabric data, a lot of those challenges has already been done. That came in a letter Thursday to FCC Chair Jessica Rosenworcel and NTIA Chief Alan Davidson, from more than a dozen senators, led by Commerce Committee Chair Maria Cantwell, Democrat out of Washington, and Ranking Member Roger Wicker, Republican, Mississippi. The senators want the FCC to extend the deadline for challenges by at least 60 days to March 14th, 2023. So again, let's talk about what that means. So we've got this, got these competing goals that we want. We want the maps to be accurate, but we also want to get the funds out as quickly as possible. So again, if everything stays as it is now, we would see the map maybe around mid-May. But if they extend it by 60 days, that could extend the time that it takes to get the map out by another 60 days. That means May, June, July. That means mid-July before the maps come out. That's going to extend the money that gets awarded. That's going to extend that out 2 more months. So those are the competing challenges that we have here as we look at this. The legislators cited some examples where the FCC maps don't jive with a Microsoft analysis of where broadband is and isn't, and are clearly troubled by the disparity. For example, they say in Washington State, 60% of the residences and businesses in one town on tribal lands were missing from the FCC map, while in Mississippi, the state broadband office says a tremendous amount of addresses were missing in high growth areas. So the state of Mississippi can get that challenge in. If they can get that in before January 13th, then that will be included in the next map. And it very possibly, again, may already be corrected, because the internet service providers that, if there are internet service providers that serve those areas, that would be that would go ahead and be corrected already. But of course, a lot of these are, unserved areas, but still there should be data. This is what we're talking about here, I think, is correcting the actual fabric data. And that challenge process has been available for at least 4 months, or will be like 4 months, I guess, by the time we get to January 13th. So again, competing goals, we want the map to be as accurate as possible. We also want to get these funds available. So I think a lot of the angst over this is about areas that maybe are already corrected in the fabric that's coming out on January 3rd. Remains to be seen, but I think the fabric on January 3rd, where you've got tens of thousands of addresses, the state that's looking at that, if the state hasn't already challenged that, I'm assuming that an internet service provider, if there is an internet service provider there, they've already challenged that. Now, of course, the issue is if there is no internet service provider, then the community has to do that. So the states have to do that, or communities have to do that. And in some cases, some states, I think it was Kansas, they said, we just can't get this done. So they are trying to empower the consumers in Kansas, and making sure that they know that you can go up to the broadband map, check your address, and if you don't have the access there, if you don't have internet, or if you see something that's inaccurate there, you can challenge that. So a lot of them are kind of relying on consumers to do that. So I think, we'll have to see what happens. But January 13th is when the NTIA is saying, and the FCC is saying, that that's your best time to get your challenges in, because the internet service providers, starting on January 3rd, will start using the new fabric to upgrade their availability data. So hopefully the fabric is much more accurate than it was when we first saw it, when internet service providers first started putting their data up there. Hopefully also now that internet service providers have had one kind of run through, the initial run through of getting their broadband availability data into the BDC system, now that this is the second iteration of that, hopefully they'll be able to do that more accurately and more quickly this time. So hopefully we have better fabric data, we'll have better availability data, more complete availability data, and it'll be much more accurate than it was last time. So I think the NTIA is going to look at this, and they're probably going to look at some of these big major state challenges. They'll probably look at what's in the fabric now, and when they look at those things, unless there really is a big discrepancy, I don't think they're going to, lots of big discrepancy, I don't think they're going to extend this. I think we're probably set for having everything on this timeline now, January 13th, to hopefully get all challenges in at that point. And then the internet service providers have until March 1st to get their broadband availability data in. I think we'll see the first FCC maps around May 15th, around June 15th or so, or maybe sooner. The NTIA will say how much each state is going to get or could get through the BEAD program. And then the states have to have their 5-year plans in, again, within roughly 9 months from the time that they got their planning funds. And everybody has their planning funds now. So again, that's putting that out at the soonest of July. And again, I think there are going to be states that are going to be ready to get their 5-year plan in just a few days after they find out how much money they have, because they're going to have gotten everything they can get done except for those final little numbers where they find out, okay, well, we're getting $100,000 more or $50,000 less than we thought, that kind of thing. So they're going to have to tweak some stuff, but if they're doing this right, they're going to have everything in place so they can get that money as quickly as possible and get it to work. So thanks for joining me. If you are an internet service provider, make sure you check out our website, zquorum.com, and we can help you in various areas of broadband deployment. After you get your broadband network built, if you don't already have one, if you get it built, you got to consider, well, how am I going to do tech support? What kind of diagnostics do I need? Do I need to worry about CALIA, the Law Enforcement Act? How do I do that? What about IPv4 addresses? Yes, you still need to support IPv4 addresses, even if you're on an IPv6 network, and we can help you with that. So lots we can do. So check us out. If this was helpful, give me a like on the video if you would, and subscribe, click the little bell, and you'll be notified when I'm live. Thanks a lot. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.